Welcome to the world of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy the listening. Richard's fingers danced across the touchscreen, his brow furrowed in concentration. The latest smartphone gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of Tech Haven, the electronics store where he'd worked since dropping out of college. A customer cleared their throat, snapping him back to reality. "Sorry, just finishing up the setup," Richard mumbled, handing over the device. "You're all set." The customer nodded curtly and left without a word. Richard sighed, running a hand through his disheveled brown hair. Another thrilling day in retail paradise. His co-worker, Jake, sidled up to him. "Dude, you look like shit. Rough night?" Richard shrugged. "Just the usual. Netflix binge, maybe one too many beers." Jake snorted. "Living the dream, huh? You need to get out more, man. There's a whole universe out there." Yeah, Richard waved him off. "I'll pencil in exploring the cosmos right after my shift." The familiar chime of the store's phone cut through their banter. Richard reached for it, grateful for the distraction. "Tech Haven, this is Richard. How can I help you?" A crisp, formal voice responded. "Is this Richard Holloway?" Yes?" Richard's eyebrows knitted together. "Who's asking?" "This is Bartholomew Winters, attorney at law. I'm calling regarding the estate of your grandfather, Archibald Holloway." Richard's stomach dropped. Grandpa Archie? The eccentric old man he'd met maybe twice in his life? I didn't even know he'd passed," Richard stammered. "My condolences," the lawyer replied, though his tone remained businesslike. "Your grandfather left explicit instructions for you in his will. It's imperative we meet as soon as possible. How quickly can you come to my office?" Richard's mind reeled. He glanced at Jake, who was pretending not to eavesdrop. "I'm working right now, but I could come after my shift, around 6. "That will suffice. My office is at 1701 Starling Avenue. Don't be late, Mr. Holloway. There's much to discuss." The line went dead. Richard stared at the phone, his world tilted on its axis. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay, man?" Richard shook his head. "I honestly have no idea." The law office of Winters and Associates loomed before Richard, all gleaming glass and sleek metal. He tugged at his wrinkled shirt, suddenly acutely aware of how out of place he looked. A receptionist with perfectly coiffed hair eyed him suspiciously. "Can I help you?" "Richard Holloway, here to see Mr. Winters." Her eyes widened slightly. "Of course, Mr. Holloway. Right this way." She led him down a corridor lined with expensive-looking artwork. Richard's palms began to sweat. What the hell was going on? Bartholomew Winters stood as Richard entered, extending a hand. "Mr. Holloway, thank you for coming on such short notice." Richard shook his hand, noting the lawyer's impeccable suit and stern demeanor. "No problem, though I'm still not sure why I'm here." Winters gestured for him to sit. "Your grandfather, Archibald Holloway, was a unique individual. His last will and testament reflects that." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I barely knew the guy. If this is about some family heirloom or whatever, you can probably find a better—" "Mr. Holloway," Winters cut him off. "Your grandfather has left you his entire estate." The words hung in the air. Richard blinked. "I'm sorry. What?" Winters slid a folder across the desk. "The full details are here, but, in short, you've inherited a substantial fortune, multiple properties across several countries, and various business interests." Richard's head spun. "This has to be a mistake. I'm just some guy who works at an electronics store. I can barely afford ramen most weeks." "I assure you there's no mistake." Winters leaned forward. "However, there are conditions to your inheritance." Of course there were. Richard's shoulders slumped. "What kind of conditions?" Winters hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Your grandfather was involved in some Specialized trade, interplanetary commerce to be precise. Richard barked out a laugh. Right, and I'm the Queen of England. The lawyer's expression remained deadly serious. Mr. Holloway, I understand this is difficult to process, but I assure you everything I'm telling you is true. Your grandfather was a pioneer in establishing trade relations with extraterrestrial civilizations. Extraterrestrial? You mean aliens? Richard's voice cracked. You expect me to believe my grandpa was some kind of space merchant? Winters nodded solemnly. Not only that, but he maintained a residence on a planet called Elysium 7. It's there that you must go to fully claim your inheritance. Richard stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. This is insane. I'm out of here. There's one more thing, Winters called as Richard reached for the door. Your grandfather was married, his widow. She's part of your inheritance as well. Richard froze, his hand on the doorknob. He turned slowly, meeting Winters' gaze. What the fuck does that mean? Winters sighed. It means, Mr. Holloway, that you've inherited not just wealth and property, but a wife. An alien wife. Richard's legs gave out. He slumped against the door, sliding to the floor. This can't be happening. I assure you it is. Winters' voice softened slightly. I know this is overwhelming, but there's more at stake here than you realize. Your grandfather's work was vital to maintaining peace between Earth and several alien civilizations. If you refuse this inheritance, it could have dire consequences. Richard looked up, his world crumbling around him. So what? I'm just supposed to pack my bags and jet off to some alien planet? Become an intergalactic sugar daddy? Winters actually cracked a smile at that. Not quite. But you do need to go to Elysium 7, meet your wife, and decide how to proceed. A ship has been arranged to take you there in 3 days' time. Richard's mind raced. This was madness, complete and utter insanity. And yet, a small part of him, the part that had always dreamed of adventure, of escaping his mundane existence, stirred to life. What if I say no? He asked quietly. Winters' expression grew grave. Then the delicate balance your grandfather worked so hard to maintain could collapse. Earth could lose valuable allies. And you, well, let's just say there are parties who would be very interested in acquiring what you've inherited by any means necessary. Richard closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision that would change his life forever. When do we leave? The next few days passed in a blur. Richard quit his job, much to Jake's bewilderment, packed a bag with essentials, and tried not to have a complete mental breakdown. Before he knew it, he found himself aboard a sleek spacecraft that looked nothing like the clunky shuttles he'd seen in old NASA footage. A stern-faced woman in a crisp uniform approached him. Mr. Holloway, I'm Captain Zhao. Welcome aboard the Stargazer. Richard nodded dumbly, still half convinced this was all some elaborate prank. How long until we reach, Elysium 7? Captain Zhao raised an eyebrow. About 36 hours, give or take. I suggest you get some rest. The first jump can be disorienting. As if on cue, a low hum filled the ship. Richard's stomach lurched as stars outside the view screen blurred into streaks of light. He barely made it to the nearest restroom before emptying the contents of his stomach. Some intergalactic trader he was turning out to be. Richard's first glimpse of Elysium 7 took his breath away. The planet shimmered like a massive sapphire, swirling patterns of blue and white dancing across its surface. As they descended through the atmosphere, he pressed his face against the view screen, drinking in the alien landscape. Towering spires of crystalline material stretched towards the sky, interconnected by graceful arches that seemed to defy gravity. Vehicles that looked like liquid metal zipped between the structures, following invisible pathways. And everywhere he looked there were people with blue skin, The ship touched down on a landing pad jutting out from an ornate building that put Earth's grandest palaces to shame. Richard's legs shook as he made his way down the ramp, the gravity slightly lighter than he was used to. A small group awaited him at the bottom. In the center stood a woman, no, an alien woman, who made Richard's heart skip a beat. Her skin was a deep, rich blue that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. Delicate patterns swirled across her bare arms and face, almost like bioluminescent tattoos. Her eyes, a startling silver, regarded him coolly. This had to be Laia, his wife. Richard stumbled forward, nearly tripping over his own feet. Hi, I'm Richard. You must be—" "Laia Rani Kavor," she interrupted, her voice musical yet clipped. "Though I suppose you may call me Laia." Richard extended a hand, then quickly withdrew it, unsure of the proper etiquette. "It's, nice to meet you." Laia's expression remained impassive. "Is it? I find that hard to believe, given the circumstances." One of the other aliens, an older male with elaborate facial markings, stepped forward. "Welcome to Elysium 7, Richard Holloway. I am Zorn, your grandfather's most trusted advisor. We have much to discuss." Richard nodded, trying to take it all in. "Yeah, I bet we do. Like how the hell I ended up married to—" "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside," Zorn interrupted smoothly. "The matriarch is eager to meet you." "The matriarch?" Richard's head spun. "Who's that?" Laia's silver eyes flashed. "The leader of our people, and the one who sanctioned your grandfather's unusual arrangement. You'd do well to show some respect." Richard bristled at her tone. "Hey, I didn't ask for any of this. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on." "What's going on is that you've inherited a position of great importance," Laia snapped. "One I'm not convinced you're remotely qualified for." Now, Zorn interjected. "Let's not get off on the wrong foot. Richard has had quite a journey. Perhaps we should show him to his quarters and allow him to freshen up before meeting the matriarch." Laia's lips thinned, but she nodded curtly. "Very well. Follow me." As they made their way into the sprawling estate, Richard couldn't help but gawk at the alien architecture and technology surrounding him. Holographic displays flickered to life as they passed, showing incomprehensible data streams. Servants, or were they robots, glided silently through the corridors, their forms shifting and adapting as needed. "This was all my grandfather's?" Richard asked, awe creeping into his voice. "It belongs to the Holloway estate," Laia corrected, "which, for now, means you." They reached an ornate door that slid open at their approach. Richard's jaw dropped as he took in the opulent suite beyond. A massive bed dominated one wall, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the alien cityscape. "These will be your quarters," Laia said stiffly. "I hope you find them adequate." Richard turned to her, 1,000 questions on the tip of his tongue. But before he could speak, Laia continued. "Let me be clear, Richard Holloway. This marriage is a formality, nothing more. A necessary evil to maintain the trade agreements your grandfather worked so hard to establish. Do not expect anything beyond that." With that, she spun on her heel and strode out, leaving Richard alone in the vast, alien room. He sank onto the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. What the hell had he gotten himself into? A soft chime drew his attention to a sleek panel on the wall. Words in an alien script flashed across its surface, before shifting into English. "Meeting with matriarch. 2 hours." Richard groaned. So much for freshening up. He had 2 hours to figure out how to navigate alien politics, deal with his Ice Queen wife, and somehow not screw up the intergalactic peace his grandfather had worked to achieve. No pressure. Richard stared at his reflection in the shimmering, liquid-like mirror. The alien attire Zorn had provided hung awkwardly on his frame, a sort of iridescent tunic that seemed to shift colors with his movements. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, grimacing. "Well, this is as good as it's gonna get," he muttered. A chime echoed through the room, followed by Laya's cool voice. "Are you prepared, Richard? The matriarch does not appreciate tardiness." Richard took a deep breath and strode to the door. It slid open, revealing Laya in all her azure glory. Her own attire was far more intricate, with swirling patterns that seemed to dance across the fabric. "I'm as ready as I'll ever be," he said, forcing a smile. Laya's silver eyes narrowed. "That remains to be seen." As they walked through the winding corridors of the estate, Richard attempted small talk. "So, what's the matriarch like? Any tips on not making a complete fool of myself?" Laya's stride didn't falter. "The matriarch is the pinnacle of our society, wise, just, and not easily impressed. My advice? Speak only when spoken to and try not to trip over your own feet." Richard winced. "Gee, thanks for the vote of confidence." They entered a vast chamber that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The ceiling soared impossibly high, adorned with what looked like living constellations. At the far end, seated upon a crystalline throne, was the most regal being Richard had ever seen. The matriarch's skin was a deep, midnight blue, etched with intricate silver markings. Her eyes, when they fixed upon Richard, seemed to contain entire galaxies. "Welcome, Richard Holloway," her voice resonated through the chamber. "We have been eagerly awaiting your arrival." Richard bowed awkwardly. Thank you, Your Majesty. I'm honored to be here." A ripple of amusement passed through the assembled aliens. The matriarch's lips curved into a small smile. "Your grandfather spoke often of your unique charm," she said. "I see he was not exaggerating." Richard straightened, unsure if he'd just been complimented or insulted. "You knew my grandfather well?" The matriarch nodded. "Archibald Holloway was a visionary. His efforts brought prosperity to both our worlds. We had hoped he would groom you as his successor, but fate, it seems, had other plans." Richard swallowed hard. "Yeah, about that. I'm not really sure I'm cut out for this whole intergalactic trader thing. I mean, a week ago I was selling smartphones in a mall." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Leia stiffened beside him. The matriarch's gaze intensified. "And yet, here you stand. The mantle has passed to you, Richard Holloway. The question is, what will you do with it?" Richard's mind raced. He thought of his mundane life on Earth, of the wonders he'd seen in just the past day, of Laia, infuriating and captivating in equal measure. I want to learn," he said finally. "I may not be my grandfather, but I'm willing to try. To understand this world and to do what I can to maintain the peace he worked for." The matriarch nodded, seemingly satisfied. "A wise answer. Lairani will guide you in the ways of our people, and in time, perhaps you will find your own path to continue Archibald's legacy." As they left the audience chamber, Richard felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He turned to Laia, grinning. "Hey, I didn't completely embarrass myself. That's a win, right?" Laia's expression remained neutral, but Richard could have sworn he saw a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "You managed not to cause an interplanetary incident. Congratulations." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Laia, true to the matriarch's word, became Richard's reluctant guide to Elysium 7. She led him through sprawling markets where impossible creatures chittered and bargained, introduced him to technologies that seemed more like magic, and attempted to teach him the basics of interstellar commerce. Richard's head spun with the influx of new information, but he found himself oddly exhilarated. This was more than he could have ever dreamed of back on Earth. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the shimmering cityscape, Richard turned to Laia. "Can I ask you something?" She arched an eyebrow. "You just did. but you may ask another question." Richard chuckled. "Fair enough. Why did you agree to this arrangement? With my grandfather, I mean." Leia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than usual. "Your grandfather saved my life. I was a refugee from a war-torn system, and he offered me sanctuary here. The marriage was a way to solidify my position and protect me from those who would exploit my situation." Richard's eyes widened. "I had no idea. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." Leia held up a hand. "It's fine. Archibald was a good man and a dear friend, but our relationship was never romantic." An awkward silence fell between them. Richard cleared his throat. "Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. I'd be completely lost without you." A small smile tugged at Leia's lips. "You're not entirely hopeless, Richard, though your attempts at using our technology are amusing." Richard groaned. "Hey, it's not my fault your computers respond to thoughts. Do you know how hard it is to not think about pink elephants when you're told not to think about pink elephants?" Leia laughed then, a musical sound that made Richard's heart skip a beat. "Perhaps we should stick to more primitive interfaces for you." As the days passed, Richard found himself growing more comfortable in his new role. He still made plenty of mistakes, like the time he accidentally insulted a Zorgax diplomat by complimenting their third arm, apparently a sensitive subject. But he was learning. More surprising was the gradual shift in his relationship with Leia. Her icy demeanor began to thaw, replaced by a dry wit that kept Richard on his toes. He found himself looking forward to their daily lessons, even when they involved mind-numbingly complex trade agreements. It all came to a head at a diplomatic reception held in honor of a visiting delegation from a neighboring star system. Richard, decked out in his finest alien finery, was doing his best to mingle and not make a complete fool of himself. Leia appeared at his elbow, her silver eyes scanning the crowd. "The Vrexian ambassador is approaching. Remember, 3 bows, then—" "Touch my left elbow to their right tentacle, I know," Richard finished. "I've got this." Leia's lips twitched. "We'll see." To Richard's surprise, the interaction went smoothly. He even managed to crack a joke that the translator rendered as apparently hilarious to Vrexian sensibilities. As the ambassador moved on, Richard turned to Leia with a triumphant grin. "Ha! Told you I could handle it." Leia's expression softened. "You're full of surprises, Richard Holloway." Something in her tone made Richard's pulse quicken. He opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by a commotion near the center of the room. A group of aliens had gathered around something, exclaiming in a mixture of confusion and excitement. Richard and Leia pushed their way through the crowd to find— "Is that a smartphone?" Richard asked, bewildered. Sure enough, sitting on a hover tray was an object unmistakably earthly in origin. Richard's old iPhone, which he'd forgotten he'd brought with him. Leia's eyes widened. "What is this device? It seems primitive." Richard chuckled. "It's a communication device from Earth. Also does games, social media, that kind of thing." An elegant alien with flowing tentacles for hair leaned in close. "Fascinating. And how does it function? Does it interface directly with your neural pathways?" No, you just use your fingers," Richard demonstrated, tapping the screen to bring it to life. A collective gasp went up from the assembled aliens as the screen lit up, displaying Richard's background, a picture of his cat back on Earth. Leia's brow furrowed. "But what is its purpose? Surely your species has more advanced methods of communication." Richard shrugged. "Well, yeah, but this is more multi-purpose. You can talk to people, send messages, browse the internet." "Internet?" Another alien chimed in. "Is this some sort of planetary network?" "Something like that," Richard nodded. "But a lot of people use it for, social stuff, dating apps, that kind of thing." Leia's head tilted. Dating apps? What do applications have to do with mating rituals? Richard felt his face heat up. It's not really about mating per se. It's more like a way to meet potential partners. You create a profile, swipe through other profiles, and if you both like each other, you can chat and maybe meet up. The aliens exchanged bewildered looks. Laya's expression was unreadable. And this is a common practice on Earth. Pretty common, yeah, Richard admitted. It's just an easy way to connect with people, you know? A mischievous glint appeared in Laya's eye. Perhaps you could demonstrate, Richard. For educational purposes, of course. Richard's eyes widened. I don't think that's such a good idea. But the crowd was already clamoring for a demonstration. With a resigned sigh, Richard opened up his old Tinder account. Okay, so here's how it works, he began, acutely aware of Laya peering over his shoulder. You see someone's profile, and if you're interested, you swipe right. If not, swipe left, he demonstrated, swiping through a few old matches. The aliens watched, fascinated. And if two individuals both swipe right, Laya asked, her voice oddly strained. Then it's a match, and you can start chatting, Richard explained. See, like this. Suddenly, the phone chimed. A new match had appeared, somehow, impossibly on this alien world. The profile picture showed a familiar blue-skinned face with silver eyes. Richard's jaw dropped. He turned to Laya, who was looking at him with a mixture of embarrassment and something else. I may have taken the liberty of creating a profile, she said softly. For research purposes, of course. The room fell silent. Richard stared at Laya, his heart pounding. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. Well, he said, I guess we're a match. Laya's lips curved into a smile. It appears so. The tension in the room broke as the aliens burst into excited chatter. Questions flew from all directions about this strange Earth custom and its potential applications on Elysium 7. As the night wore on, Richard found himself explaining the intricacies of online dating to a rapt, alien audience. Laya remained by his side, offering dry commentary and the occasional teasing remark. When the reception finally wound down, Richard and Laya stood once again on the balcony, the city glowing beneath them. So, Richard said, breaking the comfortable silence. Research purposes, huh? Laya's cheeks darkened to a deeper blue. I was curious about Earth customs. Richard nodded sagely. Uh-huh. And the fact that you swiped right on my profile? A momentary lapse in judgment, clearly, Laya retorted. But there was no bite in her words. Richard laughed. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you did, even if it was just for research. Laya turned to him, her silver eyes searching his face. And if it wasn't? Just for research, I mean. Richard's breath caught in his throat. He took a step closer to her. Then I'd say, maybe we should see where this match leads. Laya's lips curved into a smile. Perhaps we should. Richard's heart raced as he watched Laya's smile grow, her silver eyes softening. The alien city shimmered behind them, but all he could focus on was her, the way she stepped closer, their connection undeniable. Laya's hand moved to his chest, her touch delicate yet deliberate. Richard inhaled sharply, her scent pulling him deeper into the moment. This is unexpected, she whispered. Good, unexpected? He asked, his voice low. Laya's lips curved into a teasing smile. You're learning. She leaned in, her breath warm against his skin. With a swift motion, Laya pressed herself against him, their lips finally meeting. The kiss was intense, electric, and neither held back. Their hands explored each other's bodies with a passion that had been building for weeks. Laya's touch was scorching, and Richard groaned into her mouth, overwhelmed. Breaking the kiss, Laya's eyes blazed with desire. You have no idea what you've started, Earthman. Richard smirked. Why don't you show me? Laya's smile turned wicked as she pulled him toward the bedroom. They stumbled inside, too engrossed to notice anything else. Laya pushed him onto the bed, straddling his hips with deliberate intensity. Her lips grazed his neck, her hands exploring his body with confidence. Richard responded, his hands savoring her cool, smooth skin, the heat between them rising. As their bodies intertwined, the initial awkwardness melted away, replaced by fiery passion. Leia moved with expertise, every touch and kiss driving Richard to the brink. He felt like he was losing himself in her, the connection between them deepening into something primal and raw. When they finally collapsed beside each other, breathless and sated, Richard felt something profound had just occurred. Leia turned to him, her expression softened. "You surprise me, Richard Holloway." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I aim to please." Leia chuckled softly. "And please you have. But don't think this changes anything. We still have much to learn about each other." Richard nodded, his heart swelling with affection. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As they lay there in the quiet aftermath, Richard knew this was only the beginning. There was still so much to discover, within this strange new world and within each other. For the first time in a long time, he felt he was exactly where he was meant to be. The morning after the reception, Richard awoke to the soft chime of his room's communication panel. He groggily stumbled over, expecting another diplomatic crisis or trade negotiation. Instead, he found a message from Laya. "Breakfast on the Eastern Terrace? I have an idea I'd like to discuss." Richard couldn't help but grin. He quickly dressed and made his way through the winding corridors of the estate, his heart racing with anticipation. Laya was already there, looking radiant in the warm light of Elysium 7's twin suns. She smiled as Richard approached, a gesture that still caught him off guard with its warmth. "Good morning," she said, gesturing to the spread of exotic fruits and pastries before her. "I trust you slept well." Richard nodded, taking a seat across from her. "Like a baby, though I'm still not used to the whole bed conforming to your thoughts thing. I had a dream about marshmallows and woke up practically suffocating in fluff." Leia laughed, a sound Richard was quickly becoming addicted to. "Perhaps we should adjust your neural interface settings. But first, I wanted to discuss last night's revelation." Richard felt his face heat up. "Yeah, about that. I hope I didn't overstep or anything with the whole Earth dating app thing." Leia waved her hand dismissively. "On the contrary, your demonstration sparked quite the interest among our people, which brings me to my idea." She leaned forward, her silver eyes sparkling with excitement. "What if we created our own version, an Elysium Tinder, if you will?" Richard blinked in surprise. "You want to make a dating app for aliens?" "Not just for Elysium 7, Leia explained, her enthusiasm infectious, but as a bridge between our worlds, a way for humans and various alien species to connect, learn about each other's cultures, perhaps even." She trailed off, a deep blue blush creeping across her cheeks. Richard grinned. "Fall in love?" Leia cleared her throat. "Form meaningful connections," she corrected, but the twinkle in her eye betrayed her amusement. It could be a powerful tool for interplanetary diplomacy and cultural exchange. As Leia outlined her vision, Richard found himself swept up in the possibilities. They spent the rest of the morning brainstorming features, discussing potential challenges, and playfully arguing over what to name their creation. "Cosmic Connections," Richard suggested. Leia wrinkled her nose. "Too cheesy. What about Starlight Synergy?" "Now who's being cheesy?" Richard teased. Their banter continued as they worked, the initial awkwardness between them melting away into an easy companionship. Richard found himself constantly surprised by Laya's quick wit and depth of knowledge, while she seemed increasingly charmed by his creativity and enthusiasm. As the days turned into weeks, Elysium Tinder, they eventually settled on Nebula Nights as a working title, began to take shape. Richard's experience with Earth technology combined with Laya's understanding of alien cultures to create something truly unique. One evening, as they pored over holographic interface designs in Laya's private study, Richard noticed her stifling a yawn. "Hey," he said softly, "maybe we should call it a night. We've been at this for hours." Laya shook her head stubbornly. "We're so close to finalizing the compatibility algorithms. Just a little longer." Richard chuckled. "You know, for someone who initially thought dating apps were primitive, you've become quite the workaholic over this." Laya's eyes met his, a mischievous glint in their silver depths. "Well, I have a very motivated teacher. Besides," she added, her voice dropping to a sultry purr, "I find the subject matter increasingly fascinating." Richard's breath caught in his throat. The tension between them, simmering for weeks, suddenly felt electric. He leaned in closer, drawn by an irresistible force. "Fascinating, huh?" he murmured. "Care to elaborate on that?" Laya's lips curved into a smile. Perhaps a practical demonstration would be more effective. Their faces were mere inches apart now. Richard's heart thundered in his chest as he closed the distance. A shrill alarm shattered the moment. They jumped apart as the room's holographic display flickered to life, showing a frantic Zorn. "My apologies for the interruption," the advisor said, his usually calm demeanor clearly rattled. "But we have a situation. The Vrexian delegation is threatening to pull out of our trade agreement unless we can provide proof of our cultural exchange initiatives. They're demanding a presentation. Tomorrow." Richard and Laya exchanged panicked looks. Their app was far from ready for a public reveal. "We'll figure something out," Richard assured Zorn. "Tell them we'll be ready." As the transmission ended, Laya turned to Richard, her expression a mix of determination and something softer, more vulnerable. "It seems we have a long night ahead of us," she said. Richard nodded, pushing aside his disappointment at their interrupted moment. "Then let's get to work." The next morning, running on nothing but adrenaline and Elysium 7's equivalent of coffee, Richard and Laya stood before the Vrexian delegation. Their hastily prepared presentation was a patchwork of mock-ups and half-finished algorithms, but as Richard began to speak, he felt a surge of confidence. "Distinguished representatives," he began, channeling every ounce of charm he possessed, "we stand on the brink of a new era in interplanetary relations, an era where cultural barriers crumble, where understanding flourishes, and where connections are forged across the stars." As he outlined their vision for Nebula Nights, Richard was acutely aware of Laya beside him, seamlessly picking up threads of the presentation and expanding on his points. They moved in perfect sync, anticipating each other's thoughts and filling in gaps with practiced ease. The Vrexians watched with increasing interest, their tentacles waving in what Richard hoped was approval. When the presentation concluded, there was a moment of tense silence. Then, to everyone's shock, the lead Vrexian delegate burst into raucous laughter. "Magnificent!" they exclaimed, tentacles writhing with mirth. "To think, we came here expecting dry trade negotiations, and instead we find romance, adventure, the promise of interspecies coupling." Richard and Laya exchanged bewildered glances as the other delegates joined in the laughter. "You have not only salvaged our trade agreement," the lead Vrexian continued, "but you have opened up entirely new avenues of cultural exchange. We eagerly await the launch of this Nebula Nights. The Vrexian consortium will, of course, want to be primary investors." As the delegates filed out, still chuckling among themselves, Richard turned to Laya in disbelief. Did that really just happen? Laya's eyes were wide with shock. I believe it did. We did it, Richard. We actually did it. Without thinking, Richard swept Laya into a hug, spinning her around in jubilation. She let out a surprised laugh, her arms wrapping around his neck. As he set her down, their eyes met, and the electricity from the night before returned full force. This time, there were no interruptions. Their kiss was like a supernova, intense and world-altering. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Laya smiled up at him. "I believe," she said softly, "that this is what your Earth apps would call a perfect match." Richard grinned. "I couldn't agree more." The following months were a whirlwind of activity. With the Vrexians' backing and word of their innovative app spreading, Nebula Nights quickly became the most anticipated launch in Elysium 7's history. Richard and Laya worked tirelessly, their professional partnership blossoming alongside their romantic one. They faced challenges, cultural misunderstandings, technological hiccups, the occasional diplomatic faux pas, but through it all, they grew stronger together. Finally, the day of the grand launch arrived. The central plaza of the capital was transformed into a dazzling celebration of interplanetary unity. Beings from dozens of worlds mingled, eagerly awaiting the moment when Nebula Nights would go live. As Richard stood on the stage, Laya by his side, he marveled at how far he'd come. From a bored retail worker to the architect of galactic connection, all because his eccentric grandfather had the wild idea to leave him an alien wife. "Citizens of the cosmos," Richard began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "Today, we bridge the vast distances between our worlds not with starships or trade agreements, but with something far more powerful, the desire to connect, to understand, to love." Leia stepped forward, her hand finding Richard's. "With Nebula Nights, we offer you the universe of possibilities. Whether you seek friendship, romance, or simply the chance to learn about cultures beyond your own, this app is your gateway to the stars." Together, they pressed the ceremonial activation button. The sky above erupted in a dazzling display of holographic fireworks as millions of devices across multiple worlds came to life with the shimmering interface of Nebula Nights. The crowd erupted in cheers. As congratulations poured in from all sides, Richard turned to Laya, his heart swelling with emotion. "You know," he said, loud enough for only her to hear, "I think it's time we made this official." Leia raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" With a grin, Richard pulled out his old smartphone, the very one that had started this whole adventure. He opened the Nebula Nights app and handed it to Laya. "Laya Rani Kavor," he said, dropping to one knee in a gesture recognized across multiple galaxies. "Will you do me the honor of swiping right?" Laya's silver eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she took the phone. Without hesitation, she swiped right, then pulled Richard to his feet and into a kiss that sent the already jubilant crowd into a frenzy. As they parted, both laughing and slightly embarrassed by the public display, the matriarch approached. Her ageless face wore an expression of profound satisfaction. "It seems," she said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement, "that your grandfather's unorthodox methods have borne unexpected fruit. You have not only continued his legacy, Richard Holloway, but expanded upon it in ways we could never have imagined." Richard bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you, matriarch. Though I can't take all the credit. None of this would have been possible without Leia." The matriarch nodded sagely. "Indeed, it appears the universe had plans for both of you, plans that extend far beyond a simple arranged marriage." As the celebration continued around them, Richard and Leia stood hand in hand, gazing up at the star-filled sky. The future stretched out before them, as vast and full of possibility as the cosmos itself. "So," Richard said, a teasing lilt in his voice, "was it worth swiping right?" Leia laughed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I'd swipe right on you across every galaxy, my love." 5 years later, Elysium 7 had become the hottest tourist destination in the known universe. Nebula Nights had revolutionized interplanetary relations, with millions of connections made across species and star systems. Richard and Leia, now proud parents to twins with a unique blend of human and Elysium features, stood once again on the balcony where their journey had truly begun. "You know," Richard mused, watching their children chase each other, "when I inherited an alien wife and a space empire, I never imagined it would lead to all this." Leia smiled, her hand resting on her slightly swollen belly, evidence of their third child on the way. "The universe works in mysterious ways, my love, though I must admit, your grandfather's plan was particularly ingenious." Richard laughed, pulling her close. "Remind me to thank him next time we visit the ancestral holochamber." As they shared a kiss under the light of Elysium 7's twin moons, a notification chimed on both their devices. Another successful match made on Nebula Nights, another step towards a more connected galaxy. In the vastness of space, love had found a way to bridge the stars, one swipe at a time. Well, dear listeners, if you've made it this far, congratulations. You've just witnessed the greatest love story never told by NASA. Who knew that the key to intergalactic peace was just a good dating app and a healthy dose of awkward human charm? Let's take a moment to appreciate the lessons we've learned. 1. Always check your inheritance carefully. You never know when you might end up with an alien spouse and a space empire. 2. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade. When life gives you an arranged marriage with a blue-skinned beauty, make a revolutionary dating app. 3. Turns out the language of love is universal, even if you need a translator to understand what your partner is actually saying. 4. Never underestimate the power of a good swipe right. It could lead to interstellar diplomacy or, at the very least, an interesting first date story. 5. If you're ever feeling down about your love life, just remember, somewhere out there, there's probably an alien swiping right on your profile. In the end, Richard and Leia's story teaches us that love, like the universe, is vast, mysterious, and full of unexpected twists. So the next time you're swiping through your dating app of choice, remember, your soulmate might just be in another galaxy. Keep swiping, space cowboys and cowgirls. And who knows, maybe one day we'll all be using Nebula Nights to find our own alien bays. Until then, keep looking up at the stars and dreaming of blue-skinned cuties. May your matches be plentiful and your first dates be out of this world.